I think it's fair to say most people feel like you have to go through congressional lawmakers if you're going to involve American troops in a war. This seems to be obvious to me. Is the White House not seeing it this way?
No, Kevin, I think what the White House is seeing right now is a potential threat to American citizens in Ukraine, as well as our NATO allies and Ukraine itself. And so there are certain powers that are vested within the presidency, vested within the commander-in-chief, and that is what I think is necessary in order to keep our nation safe and, quite frankly, to keep the confidence of our allies strong.
Aaron, a lot of people in Washington, and I imagine elsewhere around the country, simply feel like, what does this have to do with me? Does it help the guy in the Barca Lounger in Ames, Iowa? Why are we over there? And in particular, why are we endangering American forces when the border between Ukraine and Russia would appear to be, for many, a problem between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, there are a couple of points I would make on why this matters. One, it matters because you are looking at an administration that has not been strong when it comes to national security and national security policies, especially when it comes to emboldening Putin and Russia and gifting them Nord Stream 2. There was an opportunity for Congress to stand up in January, provide further sanctions to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and stop and emboldening Russia. And instead, 44 Senate Democrats voted against that. So it does matter to the American people what is happening, especially because Ukraine is such an ally of the United States, and Joe Biden sold them out, and so did some Senate Democrats so quickly.
Fred, I just wonder, it seems that the U.S. is very strong about what may be happening between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and yet it doesn't appear to have taken on the same level of urgency, at least among some of the powers in Europe. Am I misreading that? I don't see the Germans, for example, overly exercised about this possibility. Am I wrong?
No, I think that's an important observation. The Germans have definitely not been as involved because Germany is so dependent on Russian natural gas, and they've shut down their nuclear power plants. They're shutting down their coal-fired electricity plants. NATO really has been divided. We see members of NATO members, European leaders, meeting with Russia separately. The French have convened meetings with the Germans, the Ukrainians, the Russians without the United States. So I think Putin has achieved something here. He has divided NATO to a certain point. But I also would argue that one problem here is that Ukraine is not a NATO member. And we're not going to send American troops into a country like that, which would start possibly a nuclear war with Russia when Ukraine's not a member of NATO. It's a difficult position. We have to stand our ground on self-determination and the rule of law, but no troops can go into Ukraine.
Yeah, very interesting that you point that out. I want to bring you back into the conversation, Brett. There are American forces in Ukraine at this very hour. The administration acknowledging that they are clearly in harm's way as long as they are on the ground. If you're advising this administration, what would be the #1 bit of advice you might give them?
Well, I think, one, we've got to up our game. It's a football weekend. Vladimir Putin is playing in the Super Bowl of international strategy, and we're still, unfortunately, trying to figure out how to get the ball down the field. And I think it's unfortunate because we've lost confidence from a lot of allies, and that is why I think you're seeing the kind of divisions and the doubts in Germany, France, elsewhere in Europe. So we have got to put forward a much stronger strategy. You know, today we heard from Jake Sullivan a warning to Americans. I think we need a much stronger warning to Vladimir Putin, and not just slapping on a few more economic sanctions.
You know, Aaron, whenever I think about this administration and its broad support from the mainstream media, I think that pretty much goes without saying, and yet there have been some, even the New York Times, wondering if this particular administration is in a particularly weak position as it relates to trying to rein in Russian aggression. What is your sense as we look now, perilously perhaps, at the next 24, 48, 72 hours?
Yeah, this has been an administration mired by geopolitical disaster after disaster. I mean, you look at Afghanistan, it was only a matter of time until the media came around to reporting the facts that Joe Biden has been weak when it's come to geopolitical politics here. He has emboldened Putin. They went as far as Blinken going out and saying that the pipeline was pretty much done, even though sanctions had stopped it up to that point, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which empowers Russia to circumvent want Ukraine possibly destroying their gas infrastructure altogether to give energy to other countries. When you see that, when you see a president not standing and putting forward congressionally mandated sanctions that were working and emboldening Putin, of course you're going to see the media eventually, in some limited fashion, start to turn on them. Joe Biden has weakened the United States across the board. Afghanistan was one, and what we see here in Ukraine should worry the American people and the world as a whole, because this feckless, weak leadership is endangering countless individuals, honestly.
Fred, the last 30 seconds to you. Based on everything you're seeing right now, is there any way that there's a pullback from the precipice, either by the Russians or perhaps some way, somehow the U.S. and the French get Vladimir Putin to reconsider?
I think an invasion is inevitable, not simply because of the accelerated troop buildup, but because of the way British and French officials were snubbed this week when they visited Moscow. I don't think Putin is interested in talking. He's not interested in concession from the West. We should still try, but I think asking Americans to get out of Ukraine right now was the right move.